they knew I had internal injuries, but they couldn't, worry about that too much. They were going to open me up anyway. Well, what happened, and I found out later, is as my back was opened up for spinal surgery, I bled to death on the operating table. And
Oh,
I didn't know that, but as soon as I lifted up out of my body, there was so much blood, and I saw my body on the table, and I remember thinking, "Whoo, this looks like the Civil War in here." You had seen those movies, where people's limbs are chopped up and there's blood everywhere. I was like, "Wow, this is horrible."
today we're talking with ND experiencer Tricia Barker. How are you today?
Hi, I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you. I'm so thrilled. I have a little bit of an understanding about your story, but I want to learn more and I have so many questions for you. Let's go ahead and start in with what was going on in your life prior to your NDE.
Yeah, so prior to my near-death experience, I was a college student, and right now I teach college students. So each semester, I'm reminded of what that's like, the anxiety, and I was about to graduate barely because I was partying a lot, and I was kind of getting my life together. Really, that last semester, I was running a lot, and I was on my way to this race, which was a symbol of really letting the pain of the past go, marching forward into a new life, and really being stronger. So it's kind of ironic that on the way to run this race, I had this massive accident that did change my life and did reorient me toward the light. But that's not the way it looked in the moment. In the moment, it was basically a head on collision. And it was terrifying. I mean, I had never broken a bone, yet here I was in this car, and I knew something was massively wrong. I was slumped over to one side, couldn't raise my body up, couldn't get my license or insurance out of the glove box. It was horrifying. And that's where all of that began. But basically, I was a college student.
Yeah, oh my gosh. I can imagine how frightening that must have been. I'm surprised that you were thinking about your driver's license and insurance. Like,
Yeah, I was also like waiting to see who would stop. And now I stop on the highway anytime if I'm the first person on the wreck. I mean, you have to, but even if there's a couple of people and I'm one of the first, I
mhm.
always stop just because I need to tell people not to move if they're safe within their car, and that it is really important if you have any kind of neck or back injury
Yeah,
that you wait until the ambulance get there. But
yeah.
it's there. But luckily, the third person on the scene stopped. And the third person happened to be a nurse, and she understood that I was in great pain. And her boyfriend ran. This was the '90s, so her boyfriend ran to, get to call for an ambulance, and she waited with me. And that was the first time in several years. I was very independent at college, and paying for my own way, had a lot of scholarships. And I remember just thinking, oh, this is not up to me anymore. This, my whole life, I have to give up control. Everything depends on what everyone does from this point forward. And that was the closest I came. I was agnostic at the time to kind of giving up my life to a higher power. I mean, I had grown up in an evangelical church, and just kind of briefly prayed, like, oh, if there is a God, just help me out of this horrible situation. That I just want to walk. That was all I could think about before surgery.
Yeah. So you're in the accident. Were you still aware when the ambulance came for you?
Yeah, so I didn't have my near death experience until much later when I went into surgery. They knew that I'd broken my back in several places, and they knew that I needed surgery. But this is Austin, so it's a college town. Lots of people are having wrecks, and so the surgeon who ended up operating on me had been on duty 40 hours already, and she had to go
Oh,
home, take a nap, eat dinner, and then come back and operate on me. And so by the time it was 17 hours later when they took me into surgery, so I had been just in a state of turmoil and rage and sorrow, and family members and had come and gone from the scene and were waiting, for my surgery. And when I was taken into surgery, they knew I had internal injuries, but they couldn't, worry about that too much. They were going to open me up anyway. Well, what happened, and I found out later, is as my back was opened up for spinal surgery, I bled to death on the operating table. And I
Oh,
didn't know that, but as soon as I lifted up out of my body, there was so much blood, and I saw my body on the table, and I remember thinking, "Whoo, this looks like the Civil War in here." You had seen those movies, where people's limbs are chopped up and there's blood everywhere. I was like, "Wow, this is horrible." And
this cannot be good.
and yet at the same time, there was a distance already looking at my body, like, oh, it's that body. And then I was like, we go on. And I understood immediately that my spirit form was outside of my body, and that there was this new reality that I was interacting with. And, people always say how it could be a dream, it could be a hallucination. No, this was ultra reality. So this is 5 dimensional, 6 dimensional, 10 dimensional, whatever you want to call it. It was a new dimensional reality because I'm looking at the 3D world and I'm going, oh, there's angels behind the surgeons, and they're working through the scenes, and they're sending my spirit body light and my physical body light. They're interacting with me. There's more out there. I could already feel it in that moment outside of my form. So I was absolutely convinced just in those first few moments that I was agnostic no more. That's
You know what? I'm so curious about this, and you articulated so beautifully that experience of lifting out of your body. This is what I'm curious about. When you lifted out, was your awareness instantaneously expanded? In other words, did you feel like you had so much more information about our reality system than you did prior?
I did immediately. And that was the strange part, is it was like, oh, now I remember, how
Oh,
it's almost like we forget so much within these bodies. And I think it's Eben Alexander who talks about the body is a limiter of consciousness. So the minute we're out of these brains, these eyes,
yeah.
this body, suddenly our awareness is so much greater, just in that beginning part of a near death experience. But the angels were also sending me information immediately. So I felt calm. Some people have distressing NDEs, but since the angels were there, I just felt awe and excitement, and I felt almost honored that they took time to be with me. Like they were these
Mhm.
incredible light beings, about 7 or 8 feet tall, not really male or female. Their hair was like a little bit like mine, but kind of like wavy and light filled. And they weren't male or female. They had these amazing light, eyes filled with light that was both healing and intelligent. And telepathy is how things are communicated there, which kind of makes sense because you think of all the different languages. Telepathy seems like an easier way to communicate. But the minute they communicated with me, I knew I was going to walk, I was going to be fine, that the surgery was going to be successful. But then I heard that familiar sound of, oh, now the monitor has flatlined. And I knew I was dead. That was out of body, and that was dead. And I didn't want to see how they were going to revive me. I just remember thinking, oh, there's other things out there that I want to see, not necessarily this. And so I knew just intuitively, if you think, you get to experience that. So I went through the walls of the room and out into the hallway, saw my stepdad get a candy bar, went into the night sky, and I just felt this great peace immediately, almost connected with anyone and everyone I'd known, like even just little interactions. And I just felt my soul go, I love you, have a great life. If I don't come back, don't worry about it. Even though the angels had told me I was coming back, by the time I was flying outside the hospital, I was already thinking, do I have to come back to that body?
Maybe not.
Is it a requirement? Like what if they're trying and they mess up? I can just stay out here. This is fun. And that feeling of freedom was really the first thing I felt. I mean, we always look at birds and in the sky, and that's immediately what I felt like. I can fly, I can be a part of this world in a different way. And it was fun. And then I was in this cosmos full of beautiful stars. The telescope images that are coming back right now, some of them remind me so much of where I was in that realm, which is bizarre because it's like in a few split seconds, I was what, millions of light years away from the earth. That's mind blowing, but that's what happened. And as I was floating there, I felt this intelligence coming toward me. And I wouldn't say it was God yet. It was like the intelligence of the universe. I did get to what I knew to be God, but this was like a piece of God or a piece of God's intelligence coming toward me, showing me different things about my life. And, I was a little bit judgmental. I had been raised by people who were very judgmental. If you weren't their religion, then you were judged. And then I had also been bullied, and there was just a lot of judgment that I had faced in life. So I think I had internalized that and become cliquish and judgmental in my own way, and not really seen the error of that. But one of the things I saw from the light was look into people's hearts, that people's hearts matter, not the way they
Mhm.
dress, not the presentation, that their hearts matter. And when I saw it into the goodness of certain people's hearts, I was humbled. I was sorrowful at the way I had acted. And I wasn't a mean person. I just ignored some people, like they weren't important to me. And I saw how silly that was and how people were actually praying for me and cared about me. And I didn't even take the time to get to know them. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, I will come back. I will be different. I will get to know people. I'll really, care about people. That was my first realization. And then I started seeing different things. They seemed like big messages. One was love is all that matters, it's all that you take with you. Remind them to go to nature and be like a little child. And when I heard be like a little child, I was reminded of how joyful life was when I was a kid and how faith was easy. It was simply just connecting to God or being there with God. As a child, I had spiritual experiences and I knew they were real. And I thought about that, and I thought about how close to nature I'd been as a kid, and how life was magical, even though I had a tough childhood. In some ways, it was still magical because of nature and because of faith and because of many elements. Well, looking at that, I realized, okay, be like a little child. But then I quickly was in this realm which looked like heaven, or our idea of what heaven would be, like perfect is the way I describe it. There was nothing wrong with it. It was absolutely beautiful. So, how you walk out into nature and you might see part of a tree is dead or part of the lawn is brown, or there's things that are dying, things that are being born. Everything was alive 100% with life. Nothing was dying. Everything was eternal in that space and beautiful. All the grass was deeply green. There even seemed to be a wind. Everything seemed to be swaying with this joy. My grandfather was there, and he was the only person who had died at that point and that I was close to. And he was remade himself. He had died of leukemia, and I remember him being very gaunt and sickly looking when he died. But there he looked about 35 or 40. I recognized his face, his jaw, and he just beamed with life and joy and love. And I was happy to see him and happy to see him healthy. And this is one part people often ask about my near death experience. They don't fully understand, why would a truck be there? But this truck was symbolic. Anything that you imagine into being, you can experience there. And my grandfather wanted to do what we did when I was a kid, which is I'd sit in the back of the truck and he'd drive it through the grass. And so I did that, even then. And the truck was symbolic because it had set in my yard. in high school, and it was decaying, and it was this beautiful 1950s Ford blue truck, and my dad should have redone it and like kept it up. Be worth a fortune now, but it's there in heaven. And in heaven, this truck was beautiful, absolutely amazing. And we just rode for a while together. And at some point he looked at me, and it was almost as if I could read his mind, and he was thinking, she might not make it, my body down there. And he said, do you want to go onward towards God? And I said, yes. And as I started leaving and going towards God, every pain of this life just melted away. It was almost as if it had never happened. And there's a quote that I love, that every sorrow of this earth is healed in heaven. And I believe that, because I was beginning to feel it, and I was beginning to feel how it didn't matter. All the joy was returned to me, all the power was returned to me, all the innocence was returned to me. And as I got closer and closer to God, I felt people's prayers trying to pull me back. And I remember thinking, don't worry, it's fine. If I don't come back, I feel your prayers, but I got to get to God. God's right up here. And as I was traveling towards God, the love was almost overwhelming. In some interviews, I've called it an atomic bomb of love, because it was that powerful. It was something that you can't compare to anything here. There is no passionate affair. There is no parental love for a child. There is no love that is comparable. It's like all the love in the universe directed at you. And when you feel that, you know that this is not a trick. This is the truth. This is the absolute truth. This love is what God is. And the closer I got to it, the more I wanted to stay. And the minute I had that thought, I said, no, I'm not coming back. This is great. That's when this like energetic wall was put in front of me. And I hit it, and I was like, no, 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 I don't want to go back. And God said, look down. And the way the voice sounded, God's voice, was a vibration. It was a vibration that was undeniable, that kind of pounded through me. Was it more masculine than feminine? Maybe, but it was just powerful. I can't say what it was other than it shook my soul to its core. And when I looked down, I saw all these souls walking along a river. Some were covered with light, some were in the light, and it looked like God's light was coming down towards them. And I saw fear, depression, anger, any emotion that blocked people from just experiencing the love of God as this shadow around them. And God said, you're going to teach in schools, and you're going to remind people to be in the light of what they love, and to move in the direction of their passions, and not be intercepted by fear. And I actually argued with God for a moment. I was like, no, I grew up poor. I don't want to be a teacher. They don't make any money. I'm a feminist. I don't want a traditional career. This is not what I want to do down there. And God kind of laughed. Just like, seriously, you're going to argue with me? And I felt my soul kind of bunched up and thrown back into my body. So it was like all this darkness, compressed around me. And then I was back in my body, and the nurses were handing me ice chips.
Oh, wow. What an extraordinary experience. Looking back for you now, it must be almost magical that you had that.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Now, here's a question that I have with those that have had NDEs. Where do you think you were? In other words, when you rose out of your body and you shifted and you were able to see the angels and you understood and your awareness expanded, how do you think that happens? Is it just a shift in frequency? Do you think it's just a slightly different reality? What's your perception of it now?
Now, I think that time and space are relative. And I think that time collapsed and space collapsed. That there was no time, no space. There was just the eternal moment, and consciousness can take you anywhere. So it was definitely a higher frequency. I interviewed, who was it? Jeffrey Olson, and he talks about
Yeah.
loving on his kid in the afterlife and how it felt so real. And he asked that question that they're just a higher vibration. So, yeah, we can quote manifest things here, but it takes so long sometimes. It's just hard work. There, I could go from being a 22-year
Instantaneous.
old in spirit to a kid, to a 5-year-old kid when I met my grandfather in that realm. So anything that you think you can do instantly. And I think that's important for people to realize, to think about what they want to do in the afterlife. What do you want to experience? How do you want to spend your time there? And to that question, I think it's right here, right now. I think all of that beautiful energy is just right here, but we don't tune into it frequently enough. We don't take the time to bring that heaven on earth right here, right now. That when we take the time to meditate, center that light around our houses, ourselves, our lives, and we should do this every day, that we're connecting with that heavenly realm, that it is a mystical experience simply to meditate on heaven, and it brings more light here.
Are you able to now kind of find that vibration again?
Yeah, and what I tell people is, if I'm stressed, if I'm angry, if I'm hungry, tired, like anyone else, I'm not going to be able to get there very easily. But I have been a meditator since 94. So what I believe is that I skipped a lot of the process. Like some people work a long time in life to get to this point with meditation, and I think I can dip in really quickly. So I might have, if a lot's going on in life, it might take me 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes 30, 40 minutes if I'm really stressed out, to get to that realm where I'm like, okay, I feel God, I feel God. There have been a couple of times in life where I've gone through very traumatic things after my near death experience, and I went into 8-hour meditations. It took me that long, to get to God. And God was that far away, after deep, deep trauma. And so I have a lot of empathy for people who experience horrific things in life. But I do know that meditation is healing. It's healing to the nervous system, and it does allow us to connect. So I feel like, had I not continued my meditation practice, maybe it would have been harder. By no means am I perfect. Like by no means do I just connect to God and, bring bliss into the world. But I do think, like, who would I be if I hadn't had that experience? I really think about that. Would I just have all this chatter and all this anger and all this life without this escape, to this realm, which reminds me of all that joy, all that beauty, all that healing that is possible. So I'm very,
And that's just right over there. It's just right over there.
yes, yes.
So you wake up in the hospital, you've had this extraordinary experience. I do want to ask this one question before we move on to how life was for you after this. I've heard several people say that it is more real than real. This seems like like almost like a paper cutout or a 10% reality compared to that. Can you describe that a little bit? I know for me, there are times where I feel like I'm just not quite all in my body. Like I feel like I'm just sort of almost a marionette, and I'm walking the puppet around. Can you try to describe how that felt so much more real than this feels?
Yes, my first thought was, oh, this is theater, almost as if we are these souls that put on these costumes, these bodies, and we play with stories in order to learn a lesson. That's what it felt like to me, as if souls are just dropped in, and it's not your true identity. The body is not your true identity. It's just a costume. And that was my first thought. And then I was like, why are we not aware of the angels? Why are we not aware, of our mission? Why do we forget it? Why is there so much forgetting within the body? And why is it so dense and difficult here? That was something I struggled with for a long time, but I retained everything from my near death experience, most everything. Like there are people who it takes them a long time to remember it, but I was so afraid. I was in the hospital for 10 days that all the morphine and all the physical pain would make me forget it, that I started writing it down immediately and didn't want to lose anything because it was important to me. I didn't realize I'd never forget it. That's not something you can forget.
Yeah. So you wake up in the hospital, you've had this extraordinary experience. How do you come back from that and go to the grocery store and do your laundry and
Not very
it's
successful.
a
I pity the people who have like a heart attack and then are back at work a week later. That would be so jarring. I am incredibly lucky that I had 9 months, almost a year in bed because I was in a body cast. I'd broken several bones. I had to learn to walk again. And so in my bed back home, well, even in the hospital, here's how weird I was to most people. The surgeon had liked me because I asked her about her what car she drove. She drove a BMW, and I asked her if she enjoyed. She was a young surgeon, so I remember thinking, "Oh, cool! Here's a woman who has become successful. Let me ask her about her life." Then I was asking her, "How long was I dead?" And I was talking about all these things, and she backed up, and I could tell it was almost like she didn't want me to talk about this. And I understood I could read people better after the near death experience. And it was almost as if I heard some of her thoughts going, why can't we talk about your surgery? And it was so successful. And this is what I do. Like, I don't lose people. I'm a surgeon and I do this well. And if you keep talking about this nonsense, I'm going to have to prescribe you medicine. That was kind of her mindset. And I was like, ooh, I don't want to, I don't want to be classified as crazy. I'll shut up about this to her and just talk about the body. But it felt very boring to talk about the body. I wanted to talk about, I felt like my spirit took up the whole room. And then I realized how judgmental my family was. I was like, oh, that's where I got it from. I overheard things they were saying about me, which was kind of mean. Like, oh, gross, she has a tattoo. It's just a little tiny tattoo, around my navel. And they were, gross. Why would she do that? Nasty. And, they were just talking about themselves so much, not really even empathizing with me. Here I was in pain, and they were like, well, I had to drive here. Well, I guess I'll sleep on the floor. And it's like they were there for my mom more than me. And no one was really caring about me except my grandmother who held my hand, and she's Catholic. And when I told her about the angels, she was like, I believe in angels. And there were just these little moments where people would connect with me. But in general, people were incredibly judgmental, especially my mother, who even to this day is judgmental. But she looked at me and she was like, how could she go to God? Like, just as if I was some kind of horrible person. And I looked at her mom and I was like, look, you're loved just as much as I'm loved. We're both loved and we're both wrong in our judgment. Well, she didn't like that at all. Just kind of
she was judgmental about that.
yeah. And so, even to this day, like, she denies everything that I talked to her about the near death experience, both in the hospital, and the year I was there at her house recovering. That's just her way of gaslighting me, of just saying it didn't exist because I don't fit the mold of what she expects out of someone who is a Christian or someone who knows God. And it's kind of sad.
Yeah. And I imagine that was just like a small slice of what you had to learn to work with. Because when you're in that expanded place and it's all love and it's beautiful and everything's perfect and you're in the presence of God's love, which has got to be extraordinary. And I really get what you meant about that atomic love, like that you feel like it's almost going to just overtake you. I mean, I can imagine how challenging it must have been to try to deal with all the weird issues that humans have on this planet. I mean, I don't think there's very few people walking around in a state of bliss and love all the time. Most of them have issues.
I know, and I'll say that I ping ponged back and forth between really just feeling pain in the body, but then going to that other side to heal the body. So in that first month, I was having a lot of out of body experiences, long meditations, still working with
Good.
angels to heal the body. But the minute I was with people, I was different. And I don't quite know how to put this, but the people who I partied with, if they were extreme partiers, I just couldn't even hang around them. The vibration was maybe too low, or they were too lost in self-destructive habits. The people who were just good students, but maybe partied a little, we could talk about things intellectually, but they denied my spiritual experience. I had to get a whole new group of friends, spiritual friends, Reiki workers, and yoga practitioners. And it was like my whole life changed because I could no longer fully relate to the people I'd been hanging around with. And then, yeah, I was in an absolute state of joy. I think it's the closest thing to enlightenment that I've ever felt was that year and a half afterwards. Like it was pure bliss in certain ways. Like I'd go look at a tree, I'd feel the tree talking to me, I'd feel the birds talking to me. I mean, it's kind of like I was on a mushroom trip for a year and a half. The energy
Or
of
in a Disney movie, the birds were landing on your finger and the elves were coming around.
yes, the Disney movie, like it was just blissful life at every step. Even though my body was in pain, every step I took, I was like, praise God. Every person I talked to was important. It was almost like being a newborn and being in complete wonder with this world. And I was kind of protected for 9 months. I was reading books, meditating, eating healthy food at my mom's house. And she and my stepdad had to work. So I just had a lot of time to myself to reflect. And I read Raymond Moody's books and Dan and Brinkley and, all the spiritual people who were out at that time, from Deepak Chopra to the past. And, I just delved in and found a meditation group in town, and all these older people, at this home did meditations, and I loved them all. I mean, like I was bursting with love, and, I was 22 at the time. So I remember when I went back to college, just smiling at people, and people thought it was really odd. Like people on their way to work. I remember like people scowling, like, why is she smiling? What's wrong with her? Is she crazy? Like I could hear their thoughts, or I don't even want to deal with that much joy. I need a cup of coffee, and then people taking it the wrong way, like older men. Oh, this is a young girl. Like, no, I don't mean it like that. Like there was all this misunderstanding of information. Like I was just bursting with joy. And one thing I realized over time is that, being a childlike without protective barriers, and a lot of near-death experiencers talk about this, you can be a target for sociopaths and narcissists. Because think about it, if a sociopath sees you, joyful and happy, giving money to homeless people, then they're like, easy target, very easy target. And the weird thing is I could see the light in everyone. So even
Oh.
if they were surrounded in darkness, I still believed in their power to access that light and to heal. And so a very good skill in a classroom, because there's some amount of power that a teacher or professor has. Not such a great skill out in life. Like I had to learn to put up boundaries and, not talk to certain people, and not think I could save the world.
So you did come back to be a teacher.
Yes.
How
Oh,
did,
it
how
was
was that
hard.
transition? Like, and you must have remembered God said, I have to do this. I mean, it's like, how do you say no to God?
I know. That's exactly what I felt. I felt like my whole life will be messed up if I don't do this. Like I understood that I had to. When God's your guidance counselor, there's no other option. It's not like I had an option. So as my first steps were to the end of the hallway, and it was very painful, in the hospital. They made me walk with a walker. And I remember looking at people graduating and looking out at the tower and thinking, oh, I don't get to go to law school. I have to teach. Oh, it's just angry. But then I cried about the physical part of it. And I really let the ego and physical part of it go around that issue. And I said, there must be a reason. I perhaps will understand it in time. But if God said this is what is to be, then I must believe that it's the right thing to do. And what I realized from the first moment I was doing student teaching in classrooms, I felt such amazing guidance. The very first class I had a near-death experiencer in my class. So this kid had
Oh,
returned.
wow.
He had a brain injury and he had been in a coma for an entire year, and he returned to high school to finish up. And I was teaching this class, and I told them my experience first day, and I said, I have a mission to be here. I know this may be odd to you, but it wasn't odd to them. They loved it. They wanted to talk about their own experiences. This guy wanted to write about it. Another kid had gotten off drugs and wanted to be a drug and alcohol counselor. Another person wanted to be a writer. So, this whole group of students was on board. They found it far more interesting than the what they had done before. And in English class. And so I let them write about their lives. I let them explore topics of interest to them and write about what fascinated them. And I saw transformations even in some really difficult cases. And that's always been my specialty, is I think the difficult students, because I knew they were hurting the most. And so just learning to talk with them in real ways and remind them of what was possible, even in dire situations, I think opened up their minds and in certain ways. So what I realized is not that I'm some great teacher. I realized that God was healing and working through me, that I was healed as I helped others at a level that I could have never healed myself, that I was accepting being of service. And as I was being of service, I was blessed in deep emotional ways, like every trigger from my school years, from being bullied to, you know, being a wallflower to, all the things that I experienced. I got to add some healing to the lives of students and open them up in different ways. And then all the ways that teachers had helped me. School had always been a safe place for me as a kid. And in certain ways, because of teachers and their attention to me. And so I got to create safe spaces for students. And that was a great feeling.
And I would imagine that your willingness to be very vulnerable with them and talk about a very personal experience that led to the decision to be there was really a wonderful experience for them, because so often we see teachers and they have this facade up and there's this certain personality but you coming in saying, this is why I'm here, must have been a very profound experience for all those students.
I think so. I think, it opened up discussion, certainly, depending on the students. And 9/11, I would always tell the story, but at different times in the year. I waited until I was teaching seniors in high school when 9/11 happened. And so many of them started signing up for the military. And I thought, ooh, some of them may actually die. And I need to tell them my story. Well, this opened up the most fascinating discussion. Several students had connections to their grandparents in spirit, and just all kind of stories came through. And this one kid who was hyperactive, who never shut up, his mouth was like this. And he never shut up as I told my story. He was just in absolute shock. And he was like, you died? You actually died and came back? And it was an interesting experience. And kind of to loop back to your question about how it was perceived, for the most part, I think working in school districts that were low income, people were happy to have a college graduate who was on fire and willing to work hard with these students, and they didn't care what I talked about. But some school districts did have a problem. Now meditation is quite common, but there was one school district that thought that I was teaching Buddhism, and the parents got very angry because they thought, if we can't pray in schools, then how can she teach Buddhism? And the Bibles were piling up on my desk, and it went all the way to the superintendent, and then he listened to the meditation tape that I was teaching them. And he was like, this is just breathing. This is not Buddhism.
Where's the voodoo?
Yeah. And they're like, he said, I don't have a problem with it, but I want to enjoy a football game and not talk to parents about you. So can you stop doing this? And it was kind of sad, because the students who benefited the most from it were the emotionally disturbed students. They couldn't concentrate on reading a story. But when I added meditation, I remember this one eighth grade boy raising his hand and saying, Miss, I can finally concentrate. I finished a story because of the meditation. And I thought, oh, sweetheart, he just had so much going on in his life and his emotional world that that it showed me that meditation can help students become more successful in college and high school and junior high.
Yeah, well, maybe you need to head up the Department of Education now.
I'd love to.
I'd love that too. Here's a question I have for you. Because you had such a profound experience with your grandfather and riding in the truck and then encountering the fractal of God. It is, I mean, it sounds like it's wonderful over there. I can't wait to go. I don't need to hurry it along, but it's like I am not worried about it one bit. How were we convinced to incarnate here on Earth? Earth is a tough gig. I mean, and it's getting pretty choppy right now. How do they convince us, or how do we convince ourselves, or do we think it's a good idea when we're in spirit? Does it look like fun?
It looks like a ride. I think almost like a roller coaster ride, just like in short, to us over there, when you're over there, that's what I remember thinking, that if I died and I stayed there, then I'd see everyone like this. Like there would be no time because there's no time. And so I think in that space, when we decide, we don't see the how we experience life very slowly here. And we don't see that time is our biggest struggle, and I think we're convinced because we want to make a difference and there's something we didn't accomplish in the past that we want to accomplish again. I do believe in past lives, and I think that generally there's something that we didn't do fully and we want to continue with it in this next life. And I didn't see any past lives in my near death experience. But what was so weird is I ended up moving to Boston at one point, and I remembered my past life there, that I had died in the 20s. And anything that was before the 1920s, I just knew. I could walk around Cambridge. I understood, where things were. And I also understood that I wanted to live freer as a woman, and I wanted to express myself and be understood and write a book. And I died like reading all these books. My husband in that life had died before me, and he left this great library, and I had not really been that educated, but I read all his books, and some of them were spiritual books. And I remember thinking, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be a writer. And what's so strange is I couldn't wait in this life to learn words. Like I read before kindergarten, just fully.
Oh,
So
okay.
there was that connection of that life to this life. And I don't know how to describe it fully, but I think we want to continue with something we didn't finish, and we don't see it as long as it feels or as hard as it feels, because once we're over there, all the great trauma doesn't really seem that big of a deal.
I know someone, I think it was Natalie Sudman. I don't know if you know who she is.
Yes,
She wrote a fabulous book, The Application of Impossible Things. I think I've read it 4 times.
yes,
But she said there's a perverse difference between what sounds good to us in spirit and what sounds good to us here.
yes. That is true.
Yeah, yeah. So here's a question I have for you about your particular experience because it was so broad. Why you? Why do you think that happened to you?
I know it was predestined, and there's a lot of reasons I could get into why I know it's predestined and it was meant to happen. But that's the main thing I know. I know this because, and I don't talk about this too much because it sounds strange. I was already outside of time the night before it happened, and I kept dreaming and hearing in these horrific dreams. Kept hearing my dad go, "Oh no, watch out." And I'd wake up and I was sweating. And then my mom screaming, "Oh my God, I can't believe this happened." Just over and over, this like horror at what had happened. And then a month before, and this is part of why I was getting my life together, I had smoked too much pot at a comedy club, and I did leave my body for a moment, and I heard very clearly, "You are going to die." And then I was back in my body. And I freaked out. I thought I was agnostic. So I thought I'd had some kind of psychotic break, and I thought it was due to the marijuana. I quit all drugs. I didn't even drink very much. I started running, and I thought, no, I'm not going to die. But I was being prepared. My soul was being informed
Okay.
ahead
It
of
was
time.
almost like a little break in the matrix, like information was kind of filtering through a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. As odd as that sounds, it was beginning to, and there was some, anxiety around the race too. Just I don't know how to put it. I thought in my mind, I thought I might win, because I've been training that hard in my age group. Oh, little did I know I'd be in the hospital.
Darn, I don't think you won that day. Sorry. So, do you think that it was pre-planned in that, okay, if I'm not on the right path, we're gonna bring this in? Like, do you think that it was more of a kind of a plan B if things aren't quite going in the direction that you had wanted them to when you planned this life?
Yeah, that's so there's a lot of different alternative realities. One is that I died of a drug overdose, and I saw that as a possibility, just dying at that time. Then I saw another reality where this happened, So I think getting on the right track, doing healthy things, running, my body was stronger. It made it through that wreck, and it opened me up to a different spiritual reality. And I think I had a contract with certain students. There's another part of my story
Oh,
we didn't get into, but I had tried to take my life. And I didn't have a near death experience. I just slept for 36 hours after taking too many pills. And I knew when I came back that I was meant to prevent suicide, that I was meant to work with certain students who were very depressed and show them that they could walk through it and that they could see a much better moment in their life and that it would get better. And that was part of what I was meant to do. And that I was meant to work with students who also were addicted to drugs and students who, had a myriad of issues that I had dealt with. And so I heard from God about 5 years ago, and God said, "Your mission's done." And I remember thinking, "Oh, am I going to die? Like, what do you mean? Can I win the lottery now? Can I just retire and go to Costa Rica and you will provide?" Like what is this?
it's easy streak from here on out.
And that's not exactly the truth. I went into meditation and heard it doesn't matter what you do now. Like your contract with education is complete. As long as you still bring the light to other people, you'll be fine. And so I thought, well, I'll write my book. But there's no money in books, like there's no, and I'm like, well, I'm barely pay my light bill with that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
um I still kind of struggle now, like anyone else. Like, what do I want to do? So I do readings. I connect with.
Yeah, your expanded spiritual gifts. Let's talk about what you have now that you didn't have and what you're doing with it now, because I think this is the fun part.
Yeah. So I've learned theta healing. I've worked with energy healing with myself and others. I absolutely love that. I kind of make it my own. I think whether it's Reiki or theta or any modality that you learn as a near death experiencer, you just kind of understand healing, especially if you've had to heal your own body. And so I love working with people in that way. I've had many experiences with my own ancestors and students' ancestors coming in and kind of tapping and saying, "Hey, she wants to do this, reminder of this." And, I've had all these messages throughout the years from people's ancestors. And so I thought, well, if I can do it in the classroom and I can do it for myself, let's see if I can do it for others. And so I began, I think in about 2017, giving free readings away and just seeing what it was like. And then I was like, oh, this is taking up time. I better keep doing this.
Okay, when you say readings, so are you looking at future events? Are you connecting them with their family members? What kind of readings are we talking about?
Mainly family members. So people who are in grief, I like to connect people to the other side, and a lot of times they have their own knowings and they want confirmation of that, or they're trying to open up their own gifts. I believe we all have that ability to be connected and loved to our loved ones, and mediums are often just kind of opening that door of perception a little more. So that's part of that. And future events, I do believe we have free will and there's alternate possibilities. I think I can see the light and direction that some people are going and want to go. And I prefer to use healing to like remove blocks, because our own ancestral blocks, past life blocks, just the core of who we are picks up all this information, negative information in the world right now that needs to be removed. We lose our power to certain situations, and we can get that power back in certain ways, that energetically, that it's rightfully ours. And I think that's part of what going to God did for me, was all that I had lost and given away to situations. God was saying, no, no, you're loved, you're fine, all is well. And I think people need that reminder, and they need that energetic return in order to move in the light of their dreams.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that we all have that ability. We come in wired for it. That's kind of our birthright, is the ability. It's like I can remember, and I've told this story before, the first time I saw one of those little flip phones, remember the cell phones,
Yes,
the little flip
yes,
phones when they were new. I looked at that and I thought, well, or we could have just worked on our telepathy.
yes, exactly.
That was my first thought. So I understand that we are all wired for that, to talk with our loved ones in spirit, to kind of see out how events will unfold. Why do you think we're so shut down? What happened to humanity that we're just so disconnected?
Not being connected to nature is one thing that, I think that's part of it, but also comparison, that instead of connection, that when we realize we're connected to one another energetically, then of course we want world peace, because we're feeling it not just from the news, but we're feeling all the vibrations of the pain and trauma, because we are all connected. And so we want everyone to be safe and happy and well and moving in the direction of their dreams. Then there's not that disruption, within the field. So yeah, this earth plane is a tough place, because it might be hundreds of years before we get to a place of peace. And I think coming to this point in life where I'm in my 50s, I'm like, oh, I may not see this. I may just be working towards greater peace and harmony, and just planting those seeds for the next generation to continue to work on this. And I think it's disheartening, but it's also like, okay, do my best. Like I've got
Yeah.
to empower the youth. And so I do have a resurgence of loving teaching again, from that perspective of empowering them to be their best for the
Now
future.
you're working at the college level now, right?
Yes.
How are you still sharing your story with your students?
It's so out there now that a lot of them have heard of it, or they'll read
They
my
sign up for your class just to,
or or they'll ask for a medium reading sometimes, And I'm like, well, if that's how you want to use office hours, I guess so. So
that
look,
I
I'm in.
would have, that's what I would have done. Okay, let's talk. I want grandma. I want.
Yeah, so it's fun. And this, after the pandemic, a lot of students are very spiritual too. So they've found their own practices and ways of connecting.
So, given the bumpy planet that we're living on right now, and given the fact that you've seen where it's really, really cool, which I wouldn't mind being there, what's your best advice for people right now? I mean, it just seems like something every day. And it almost feels like to me that it's designed for a reaction.
Yeah.
Just, it's like one thing after another. What's your best advice for people to
Hmm.
make it through this without losing their minds?
Ah, yes. So first, center your own world. I'm going back to that point about sending and clearing your own energy of what you've picked up from the news, from other people. Start every morning and every evening with kind of this wash of God's love, and just letting it all. And you can stand on the ground. The earth helps if it's nice outside. You live in Florida and I live in Texas. So we have a lot of nice evenings where you can just put your feet on the ground, look at the stars, and go, wash me of this day and give me the strength that I need to stay protected and to stay in the light and to help others. And that energy is important, because every person who does this centers energy of light. And the more people who do that, the more there's a tipping point, because it does spread energetically. So remember that your energy matters, but also we can't fix the whole problem. And I love what one near death experiencer said in an interview. She said, look, it's a big messy house. Maybe all you get is the kitchen table, but you better clean off that kitchen table and make it sparkle. And so, that's what we do is, you give your energy to what you're good at and what you can do and make it great.
That's such a beautiful, you put that so beautifully. And it reminds me of, we all hear that kind of cliche saying, love yourself first. Love yourself first. And I always thought, okay, love yourself first, blah, blah, blah. What about that guy over there? What about that problem? But if we all loved ourselves, every single person would be happy.
Yes.
And no one would be wanting or angry or needing or this. If we all loved ourselves, everybody's in a good mood. Nobody's looking to control. Everyone's wanting to be helpful and loving because they're centered. So I think that as cliche as it is, it's brilliant advice.
It is. It is. And, beyond that, I just have to say that working on your own triggers so that you are a force of what you want to be in this world is important work. That healing yourself does allow you to be the best version of yourself. So, yeah, it does all begin with you creating peace within you. And I loved your point about telepathy. I had that same thought too, with cell phones. And now, it's a very silly way to end this interview, but my husband and I sometimes we go blah 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 when we're just saying things that don't matter, and sometimes we actually understand what the other person means. So I think that telepathy is definitely possible, and that chatter that the brain constantly has, you can learn to just see it as chatter and sink back into the magic of just being.
Yeah, beautifully put. So how do we find out more about you?
You can go to my website, triciabarkernde.com, and contact me there. You can go to my YouTube channel, and I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and all those platforms.
So what are you doing on your YouTube channel? Tell us about that.
I'm interviewing some people here and there, and I'm also just giving little talks here and there as well. So
Oh, wonderful. Well, this has been such a delight. I could talk with you for quite a while, and I'm sure I'll have 5 questions tomorrow thinking about all of this. So thank you so much for your time. I hope
thank
you'll come back
you.
and see us again sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh,
But many blessings to you.
all right. Thank you. Bye-bye
Bye.
now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Coming up next, this is a good one, or you might really like this one too. Either one of them could be perfect for you. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe.